There's a version of intelligence that looks like a superpower from the outside. Fast answers, quick connections. The person in the room who always seems to be 3 steps ahead. And people look at that person and think, must be nice. But here's what they don't see. The same mind that solves problems quickly also can't stop solving them. It runs at night when it should be resting. It replays conversations looking for what went wrong. It anticipates every possible way a situation could fall apart and then lives inside that anticipation. High intelligence has a shadow side, and psychology has been documenting it for decades. We just don't talk about it because it feels uncomfortable to say that a gift can also be a burden. Today we're going there. The mind that won't stop. Let's start with the most common one and the most misunderstood. Overthinking is typically framed as a bad habit, something you choose to do, something you could stop if you just decided to. But for highly intelligent people, rumination isn't a choice. It's a byproduct of how their brain processes information. Research on cognitive complexity shows that people with higher general intelligence tend to engage in more elaborate mental simulation. They don't just consider what happened, they model what could have happened, what might happen next, what it means about them, about others, about the situation. This is useful when you're solving a complex problem. It's exhausting when you're trying to sleep. Psychologists call the extreme version of this analysis paralysis, a state where the brain generates so many variables that making even simple decisions becomes genuinely difficult. Not because the person is weak, because their mental model of the situation is more detailed than the situation probably warrants. The irony is real. The more capable the mind, the harder it can be to simply let something go. The loneliness that doesn't have an obvious cause. If you score high on measures of intellectual curiosity or abstract thinking, there's a specific kind of social loneliness that tends to follow you through life. It's not that you dislike people, it's that most casual social environments aren't built for the kind of conversation you actually want to have. You're not interested in what happened on TV last weekend. You want to talk about why people make the choices they make, what's actually driving the news cycle beneath the surface narrative, what someone really means when they say they're fine. And most of the time, most people aren't ready for that. Not because they're incapable, but because that level of depth requires a kind of energy and openness that casual socializing doesn't usually invite. So you learn to perform, to match the temperature of the room, to talk about surface things when you want to go deep. And you leave most social interactions feeling vaguely like you left something important unsaid. That's not arrogance. That's a genuine mismatch between the kind of connection you need and what most environments offer. And over time, it can create a loneliness that's hard to explain because from the outside, your life might look perfectly social. The problem with seeing too much, there's a particular cognitive trait that often accompanies high intelligence called hyperreactivity to environmental stimuli, a tendency to notice and process details that other people filter out automatically. This is genuinely useful in certain contexts. You catch inconsistencies, you read between the lines, you pick up on the shift in someone's energy before they've said a word. But it means you're also taking in more than most people. More noise, more emotional data, more awareness of the gap between what someone is presenting and what they're actually feeling. And that constant intake is tiring in a way that's hard to communicate to someone who doesn't experience it. Because from the outside, you're not doing anything, you're just sitting there. But inside, you're processing an enormous amount of information that other people's brains are quietly discarding. It also makes dishonesty particularly grating. When you can see what someone is doing, the performance, the manipulation, the social maneuvering, and you're expected to pretend you don't, it takes something out of you every time. The pressure that never quite lifts. Here's something that rarely gets named directly. When people know you're smart or perceive you as smart, they hold you to a different standard. One mistake and the response isn't that happens. It's I thought you were smarter than that. Over time, this creates something psychologists call imposter syndrome, a persistent internal sense that you're not as capable as people think, that you've been getting by on luck, and that eventually someone is going to figure that out. And the cruel twist is that intelligent people are often more susceptible to this, not less, because they're aware of how much they don't know. They can see the gap between where they are and where they could be with perfect clarity. And that gap, when you're holding yourself to an impossibly high standard, always feels too wide. So you push harder, achieve more, and somehow still feel like it's not enough. That cycle, achieve, doubt, push harder, achieve again, is exhausting. And it's not ambition, it's anxiety wearing ambition's clothes. Boredom as a real psychological problem. This one is consistently underestimated. The human brain, when it's operating well below its capacity for extended periods of time, doesn't just feel mildly uncomfortable. Research on cognitive engagement shows that sustained understimulation can produce genuine psychological distress, restlessness, irritability, a sense of meaninglessness that can look a lot like depression from the outside. For highly intelligent people, this isn't occasional. It's the baseline experience of a lot of environments, repetitive jobs, predictable conversations, routines that never change. The behavior that follows, zoning out, procrastinating, abandoning projects midway, often gets labeled as laziness or lack of discipline. But it's more accurate to call it what it is, a mind looking for complexity and not finding it, withdrawing its engagement as a result. This is also why highly intelligent people often have more unfinished projects than finished ones. The beginning, when everything is new and the problem space is unexplored, is genuinely engaging. The middle, when the novelty wears off and what's left is execution, often isn't. Perfectionism that isn't really about the work. There's a distinction in psychology between adaptive perfectionism, high standards that drive performance, and maladaptive perfectionism, standards so high that they become a source of chronic shame. Highly intelligent people are disproportionately represented in the second category. Because when you're capable of imagining exactly what something could be at its best, the gap between that vision and what you've actually produced is always visible, always. And for some people, that gap doesn't motivate, it paralyzes, or it produces work that's technically excellent but feels internally like failure because it didn't match the mental standard. This is why some of the most capable people you'll ever meet are also some of the most hesitant to share their work. Not because they lack confidence in the conventional sense, but because they're the harshest critics of themselves and they know it. Questioning everything, including yourself. Intellectual honesty, the commitment to following evidence wherever it leads, is one of the defining traits of a genuinely intelligent mind. But it comes with a cost. When you apply that same rigorous skepticism to yourself, it doesn't always produce clarity. Sometimes it produces a kind of recursive doubt, questioning your motives, questioning whether your questioning is itself motivated by something you haven't fully examined, questioning whether any conclusion you reach can be trusted. Most people have a set of beliefs and values that function as stable ground. They don't examine them constantly because they don't need to, they just stand on them. For highly intelligent people, that ground is often less solid, not because they're less stable as people, but because they've examined the foundations and they know how much of what feels certain is actually constructed. And living with that awareness that most certainty is provisional is genuinely disorienting in ways that are hard to share with people who haven't experienced it. Carrying emotions that aren't yours. The last one is perhaps the most quietly exhausting. High intelligence and high empathy frequently travel together, not always, but often enough that researchers have begun exploring the overlap between cognitive complexity and emotional permeability. What this looks like in practice, you walk into a room and you know, before anyone says anything, that something is off. You can feel the weight in someone's posture, you absorb the tension in a conversation. You leave interactions carrying emotional residue that isn't yours and didn't belong to you, but followed you home anyway. Psychologists call this emotional contagion, and for people who experience it strongly, it's not metaphorical. It's a real transfer of emotional state that can significantly affect mood, energy, and even physical well being. The challenge is that you often can't explain where it came from. You felt fine an hour ago, now you feel heavy. And unless you've learned to track this, it can be disorienting. This sense of being affected by something you can't quite name. None of this is meant to be a complaint or a competition for whose struggles are harder. It's meant to name something that often goes unnamed, that high intelligence isn't a solution to the human condition. It's a particular way of experiencing it, one with its own set of genuine difficulties that are easy to dismiss because they don't look like suffering from the outside. If any of this resonated with you, I want to offer you something simple. The mind you have, the one that won't stop, that sees too much, that holds itself to an impossible standard, it is not a burden to be managed. It is, when pointed in the right direction and surrounded by the right people, one of the most remarkable things a human being can be born with. The work isn't to quiet it, it's to learn to live alongside it with more patience and a little more compassion than you've probably been giving yourself.